The hosts feel it would be a little unkind to present this podcast without just a word of friendly warning. We are about to unfold the story of Frankenstein, a man of science who sought to create a man after his own image without reckoning upon God. It is one of the strangest tales ever told. It deals with the two great mysteries of creation, life and death. I think it will thrill you. It may shock you. It might even horrify you. So if any of you feel that you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now's your chance to. Well, we've warned you. Hello and welcome once again to the Frankencast. I'm the mad scientist, Anthony Bowman. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm joined as always by...
the bulldozer that's coming for your grandstands, that is Eric Velasquez. My pronouns are also he, him.
Yeah, and so this week we are joined by a very special guest. We're super excited about this. The author of the recent novel, It's Alive. Welcome, Julian David Stone.
Hi there. It's great to be on with you guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming along.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. And we were really excited when you all reached out to us, and extra excited when we got that big box of goodies and stuff. It was very exciting.
Yeah,
well, I don't think we've stopped smiling since.
Good. Yeah, no, I was happy. The publicist put together those really fun boxes of stuff, and it's been fun.
Yeah. So one of the first questions that we kind of whenever we interview people is, so why Frankenstein? What is it that draws you to Frankenstein?
That's a great question because it's definitely my favorite of the monsters and my favorite film of all of them, of the whole cycle. It just feels like it's the centerpiece of the whole Universal monster universe. I know Dracula was made before, but to me this is really the launching off point. As much as I love Dracula, Frankenstein is just the one that feels like all of the elements are together for the cycle that's going to go on now, that goes on for another 25 years or so afterwards. And I think that's what I love about it. And also, you can't say enough about Karloff's performance. I contend it's one of the greatest in the history of movies ever. And so those are the two things that sort of draw me to it, the launching off point and Karloff.
Yeah, it was interesting. I knew some stuff about Lugosi almost having the role and stuff, but when you look at IMDb or something and see that Dracula and Frankenstein came out in the same year, in your mind you just think those were just right back to back and everything was smooth sailing. But I mean that's kind of the central thing of this book is the time between those two movies, so much happened.
Oh, absolutely. I live in Los Angeles, and my prior career before writing novels was a screenwriter, and I can tell you nothing is smooth sailing when it involves Hollywood. And the other thing you learn is that nothing has changed. You read accounts of the business from 100 years ago, and it was the same exact business. There's a film, I always tell people to look at this. There's a film from 1929 or 1930 called Showgirl in Hollywood. Everything it's about this girl who sort of comes to Hollywood, and everything that happens in it is exactly what happens today. It's like the first time they started making movies, all of the cliches and all the craziness started from the beginning. And, Frankenstein was no different than, it means a lot to us, but it was another film, and it went through all the craziness that was the business at the time and continues to be to this day.
So I got to ask, how much would you say was actually made for the book, and how much actually came out of your research?
There's, it's fiction, so there's stuff that's made up, but all the stuff about it going back and forth between Karloff and Lugosi is the truth. If in the book, even though it's a work of fiction, I have quotes in it in the beginning and then one at the end, all those quotes are real. Those are actual quotes from the time in the newspapers, and the evidence of just how close, the back and forth between Lugosi and Karloff is there's a very famous letter that James Whale wrote to Colin Clive that he received when he got off the boat from England on his way to Hollywood. That's dated about 2 to 3 weeks before the shoot of production. And in it, he says, playing the role of the monster will either be Bela Lugosi or Boris Karloff. So there you go. You know, that's the reality of it. That's an actual letter he wrote. And there's no mention of Karloff being in the movie until the very first day of production, when it finally appears that he's been cast. So the decision clearly came down to the last minute. Now, I took some creative license and created some scenes based on, you know, what the film business was at the time, but I stuck to the truth as much as I could.
Some of those, the specific scenes, there were several that I was like, did that, like, I kept trying to look up to, like, did that really happen? Like,
happen?
Especially, I think the first one that really got me was the anniversary banquet with, like, Junior rushing around trying to erase the VP stuff from everything. And I was just like, man, that's...
Yeah, I don't know for a fact that that happened, but that's based on the one thing that you can say about the Laemmles. They loved to throw a party, and they were known for that in the time, that they would throw these parties. And Carl Laemmle Sr., every year for sure, but it seemed every week they found some anniversary of something to celebrate. I mean, if it wasn't his beginning of the film business, the building of Universal City, the first theater that he helped build, everything they could find some sort of anniversary. So it was based on that. And like I said, they were known particularly for throwing a lot of banquets and parties, and you can find historical records of those. And one of the fun things in my research was I not only researched the horror films, but I researched the period and read a lot of biographies and autobiographies. And it was always fun when suddenly the Laemmles would appear. And inevitably, it was some sort of party. It was literally like it was all the time. And then we went to a party at the Laemmles' house. You know, they just love to throw them. And there's a lot of photos of the shindigs that they threw either at Carl Sr. had a very beautiful house in the mountains that they threw a lot of parties at. But they also did a lot at banquet halls at the various hotels around town.
So, is there one scene that? I know it's like choosing between your children, right? But what is your favorite scene out of the entire book?
I would say that I'll have to give you two, if you don't mind,
I'll accept that.
Because one is sort of specific to the monsters and one is to Hollywood. The first one is I love the poker scene among the heads of the studios. That's based in truth. Samuel Goldwyn would throw this legendary poker game that had incredibly powerful people playing at, and that's a scene that I just wanted to dramatize because I love that notion of, these people who compete against each other then coming together just to sort of socialize and have this poker game. And then the other one, and I'm sure especially with the title of your podcast you'll relate, the scenes in Jack Pierce's makeup room. That to me was when I started writing, and I said, what would you give to have been in that room just one afternoon or evening or morning watching him, prepare Karloff. So, that's the fun of being a writer is you get to create that scene. So that's another personal favorite.
Yeah, that scene was particularly like, really fans of Frankenstein, are aware of like the bridge thing, but I love the way you kind of like slowly like hinted at it. It was you built a lot of tension there, even for somebody who knew what was coming. So you didn't find out that he had actually taken it out, and that was like the linchpin to him getting the role until the very end. Right.
Yeah. That was one of those things as a writer when you find again, that's how I used real facts and sort of massage them into the fiction. I don't know for a fact that he took it out at the last minute, but to me, it's irresistible because it's particularly in the first film, it's such a part of what makes his face so amazing is that sunken, thing on the side. And what a moment that was when they made must have been when they made the decision to take it out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and in general, I think that the thing that most impressed me about this book is that we know the ending before we start reading it. Like we know the movie got made, but it's still so tense. Like I couldn't put it down, even though I knew what was going to happen at the end, because it's just the tension was just really palpable.
Yeah, thank you. That was one of the goals, and a lot of people have said that. I've been very pleased with the reviews, and a lot of people have said that. Like, I know how this is going to end, but it's one of the reviews that I got early on, and I take this as an extreme compliment. They compared it to like a Columbo episode, where it starts like the murderer. The tension is in how do we get to what's the mistake he made, and it's the same thing. I was kind of going for that, is that here are the characters, you know who's going to win this out, but what is the thing that finally does it? And that allowed me to sort of explore the themes that are in the film.
Let me ask you this. So there is a certain part of the book involving the younger version of Junior. And it's set during 1919, during the height of Spanish flu.
Right.
Did that have something to do with recent events? Was that inspired by recent events, or did you plan this before?
No, I started working on this thing in 2013, and and when when the pandemic took off, I obviously thought of this, and I even thought, is that going to, my first thought, as a writer, you're always afraid everything's going to be a problem. Is that going to be a problem in it? Is it going to seem like, oh, I'm doing this intentionally? But no, that was always in there. As soon as I found out that, his mother had passed away during the pandemic, or during the Spanish flu. And yeah, it's just almost exactly 100 years ago to when it started here.
Yeah, there was something really visceral about reading that scene, and like everybody putting on masks to talk to each other, and it was just like, how much things haven't.
Once the bandanas came on, I was like, oh no.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really appreciate it. I think it was really well done.
Thank you.
Another one of my favorite scenes that I feel like definitely it was, poetic license, but was just such a great moment, was Lugosi and Karloff meeting together over Lon Chaney's grave. Like, such a great scene.
Yeah, that was one of those things that actually came very late in it, and obviously that didn't particularly take place, but they did both know him. That was actually true. Particularly Karloff actually knew him, and tells. I think I included it in the book. Just that he tells this story of getting a ride from Lon Chaney Sr. sometime in like 1924, and Chaney Sr. telling him, like I say in the book, about look for something to make yourself sort of stand out. So that there was a little bit of a relationship there, and I think it's sort of debated, but there's some belief that Lugosi may have been in early in his career in Hollywood in an early silent of Lon Chaney's. It's not verified. I've heard sort of some people think that's him, some people don't, but he certainly started to get compared to him after Dracula, and that is true that initially Universal wanted to market him as another Lon Chaney, which is why they initially wanted him to be in Frankenstein. And I think it's in the box that you guys were sent. That's a real poster that existed that Universal put out the first really mention of Frankenstein has Lugosi listed in it, that poster with the lasers coming out of his eyes.
Yeah, I love that poster.
Yeah, it's really good. So in your opinion, who do you think really was the successor of Lon Chaney? Do you think it was Bela Lugosi? Was it Boris Karloff? Or was it his actual heir, Lon Chaney Jr., to a degree?
In a lot of ways, I would almost say none of them, because none of them really quite pursued the career that Lon Chaney Sr. had, where it was almost it's almost like the cliche about Meryl Streep having a different accent in every movie. With Lon Chaney Sr., it was like he had to have a different look in every movie, and none of those three guys really did that. They definitely got pushed in that direction, but it wasn't their only thing they did, where that's all Lon Chaney did was sort of change his appearance for each film. It's almost like there was Lon Chaney, and then the three of them became his children, including his one biological one. They were all sort of products of the wonderful type of acting that he started, and the type of
sons of Chaney, if you will.
Yeah.
I really, one of the like little kind of, it was like sort of an Easter egg that you just kind of dropped without really going into detail. I didn't realize that Karloff had worked with Roland Lee before Son of Frankenstein.
Yeah.
It was kind of nice that he sort of helped him, finish up his job.
And that's based on fact. I dramatized exactly what they did, but that is, that was something that came up in my research, that apparently he helped him get out of this previous engagement he had when it looked like he was going to get the role. And if you ever watch that film, The Guilty Generation, Karloff appears quite a bit in the beginning, and then suddenly at the end, like I do, there's just this close-up of him on the phone, and it's very sort of like, okay, this is interesting. It goes from sort of he's in these scenes with a lot of people to just sort of this one wrap-up scene at the end. So it definitely kind of has a look if you give it some backstory. That certainly feeds into it, and it's funny how they ended up, doing Son of Frankenstein. And then also when I started to research into Roland Lee's background, that he did have that background, just like Karloff, as sort of a traveling actor, that he grew up even younger than Karloff on the road with his parents and, all of that as a young actor.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah, I don't know nearly as much about Roland Lee's story. That's
I honestly didn't until I started, researching it. And when you start to, find all this great stuff about it, it just, that's the fun of writing, when you can fit all the pieces together.
So here's another question for you. How much fun did you have writing Luella Parsons?
I had a blast. She's a great character, and there's, again, it was something where I sort of glommed onto her and then started doing the research. And, so much of I didn't even have to make it up. Like, it's the truth about her. And there's a great piece I uncovered of her talking about, like, sitting next to Junior Lemley at a party, and, oh, he's a young man with ambitions. It was just, it just all fit in exactly what I wanted. She was just perfect. And just, you find the characters, and then you just find the way to keep using them. And she was such a great character of the period.
I could definitely tell you enjoyed that. Those scenes were always a blast. It was like, she's kind of annoying, but not so annoying that you dislike her.
Yeah, and I wanted to, I consciously made sure that she appeared in the storyline for all three characters, because she was so fun as, she's sort of the lack of a better term, almost like in Greek theater, the chorus part, that's Hollywood. She represents, like, she brings in the viewpoint of what Hollywood thinks of each of these three characters.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because I wanted to have, like, when she ran into Karloff, she had no idea who he was. It was just a guy she was talking to, because he hadn't become a star yet.
Right.
Yeah,
I loved him, like, Karloff getting invited to the premiere and then not being let in. That just felt.
Yeah, he's very honest. If you read about his history, he was a struggling actor, and he talks about, some people sort of are like, what did you feel about getting typecast, even though he kind of was, but wasn't typecast. And he's just, his thing is like, I owe everything to that Jolly Green Giant. He was nowhere for 43 years. And I don't mean that in any way to disparage him. He worked constantly and he was a wonderful actor. But I think Frankenstein is like his 80th movie. He had all these little tiny parts, and then, suddenly he becomes a star. And, what's really fascinating, in some of it was done for hype, but some of it was because he wasn't known. At the end it says the monster and it has a question mark, he's not mentioned.
Yeah.
And then you cut to, just months later when he's in The Mummy and his name is larger than the title of the movie. It's like, that's how quickly he became a star. And the other thing I always say when people talk, ask about, like, where Karloff's career was at the moment that he made Frankenstein, right after Frankenstein, a movie comes out that he had shot before Frankenstein. He'd made it, he was working a fair amount, but doing a day or two here and there. And a movie comes out right after the completion of shooting on Frankenstein. And in that film, his part is literally waiter. Doesn't even have a name. It's just David. So that just shows you where his career was at. There were some okay roles where he'd get, a couple weeks here, or not even a couple weeks, like a few days here or there. But, he was a struggling actor, and it all changed very quickly.
Yeah, it's amazing, like, having a non-speaking role can just, like, skyrocket him to stardom that way. Like, he's a great actor, but that's, not a role where he, like, gets to really show his acting chops the way that he did later.
It's true, but it's what he did with the role. Like I said, it's something that others have talked about, and it's very true that, it could have been, it's why he stands out and why the film stands out. It would have been very easy to just have him stumbling about and growling and attacking things, but he brings such empathy to the character. It's really
Mhm.
incredibly moving. And, you know, I don't see any of him. It's like you said, he did do more acting later, but I don't see any of the Boris Karloff character. That's sort of, with the lisp. He didn't
Mhm.
speak, but even his general manners, he just is so wonderfully lost in that character. It's just remarkable.
Yeah, I definitely every time I was reading his part, I heard his voice, like
Okay.
reading it to me. So good on you for that. But so let me ask you this. So you don't have to tell us if this book's going to eventually become a major motion picture. But if it were, do you have a casting in mind?
Well, it's come up a lot, and I would certainly love it to be a major motion picture. My background before this was as a screenwriter, so I certainly had that in mind as I was writing it. A lot of people have suggested a lot of fun stuff. I think he just passed away, but I think Jeremy Irons was mentioned as Karloff. Did he pass away? Am I wrong? I feel like he did, or maybe
It would be news to me, but maybe.
I think it's Christopher Plummer passed.
Yes, Christopher Plummer.
And I sort of get them mixed up. Jeremy Irons was mentioned, and then the hardest one is somebody had a good Lugosi, because it's been fun. Other people, do you guys have any ideas of who you would cast in it?
Here's I don't know what this says about me as a person, but whenever I kind of see like long shots of Jack Pierce, I kind of see Harvey Keitel.
Oh, he'd be a great Jack Pierce. That's a great one. Yeah, he would be good. God, I wish I could think of somebody had a fun one for Lugosi. And Junior Lemley. There's so many young actors that would be good for Ryan Reynolds. Maybe if he was 10 years younger. Somebody like that. It's very castable. There's a lot of good parts.
Oh yeah, there are, no doubt.
Yeah, I'm trying to think who would be. I always like thinking about people playing Lugosi. I always think about like Martin Landau and Ed Wood,
Yeah.
and I never would have thought of him as being a good Lugosi, but his portrayal is so interesting in that movie. So
he was great in that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that would be obviously an older Lugosi, and not who you'd want for this. But
Yeah.
I don't know who would be a good Lugosi, but yeah.
All right, we're gonna do our hunt for Lugosi.
Well, let's hope we'll get an answer to it, because yes, I would certainly love it to be a film.
Yeah, I would absolutely be in line for it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I'm buying tickets right now. You just tell me when.
Yeah, I think that because like I've seen there's like Gods and Monsters that sort of talks about more the making of the movie, and I thought that this book, when I picked it up, I thought it was going to be similar to that, but like the fact that so much happened even before the movie started, it's like a prequel, and yeah, I mean like the story's fascinating. I think it would do really it would do really really well as a film.
One of the fun things about, since the book's been out and it's been very well received, I've had a lot of people reach out to me, and one of them was one of the producers on Gods and Monsters, and he liked it a lot. And I told him, hopefully someday there'll be able to be a double feature, of Gods and Monsters in this, because that was a terrific film, but obviously that deals with Whale and many years after Frankenstein. I didn't when I started writing it, I really didn't know, where it was going to end, but it just seemed, it's like what you said, the rest of the story is kind of known, but all the turmoil before is the part that I thought was kind of the most interesting in terms of a broader audience, and also what would be good in a novel.
So, I mean, you've done Frankenstein. What are your thoughts about doing the others and just making this a series?
Well, I would love to. A lot of people have asked me that, and I definitely would love to take these characters forward. They're great characters, and there's a lot there. It is really fun that they went on to do 8 or 9 movies together. So it's very, very rich. And Junior Lemley's story is also very interesting. It's a little tragic. I mean, they lose the studio in 1936, and then he kind of vanishes. A lot of his relatives have reached out to me since the film came out, and it's been exciting for me, because finding out about the guy after being the head of production at Universal has been a real detective story, and they kind of filled in a lot, and you got the sense that a lot of them didn't know. They just would visit him a lot of them apparently visited him Sunday. It seemed to be the day that a lot of people would visit him, and they had no idea of the past that they had, and it kind of makes sense if you think about it, because the Lemleys did lose the studio, so it was probably something they didn't particularly want to talk about. Now, we look back at this golden age when they started this wonderful horror cycle, but to them, it's a business that unfortunately they lost. So, but anyway, going back to your question, I would absolutely love to take these characters forward, and there's a lot of great stuff, over the next few years after Frankenstein about all of them.
Oh yeah, I would absolutely love to read what happens next.
Yes,
and it's so tragic and surprising that Lemley lost the studio. Like, considering how these, the Universal monster cycle of movies is still so important today and widely watched and discussed and everything. It's wild that they weren't able to succeed as a studio with all that.
Well, part of it was some of what, the other films that Junior was making. He had very big visions for what they wanted to do. And they started, when he took over the studio, when his father put him in charge, he started spending more on films. And that's ultimately what doomed them, that they, they spent a lot of money on other films that didn't necessarily perform. Some of them did, but it's a tricky business. Studios change hands all the time, as we all know. And unfortunately, they, it didn't work out, and they lost the studio.
Also, there's literally no accounting for taste. What would be a hit one year may not fly the next. Who knows?
Yeah, well, even the cycle, all of them were hits. I sort of look at the 5 that were made that started the whole thing when Junior Lemley was running the studio: Dracula, Frankenstein, Mummy, Invisible Man, and Bride of Frankenstein. And then the first one that it sort of started when Junior's running the studio, but it's really done mostly afterwards, Dracula's Daughter, it didn't perform as well, and that's where the cycle sort of stops for a while. So what brought it back very famously was the double feature of Dracula and Frankenstein that a theater owner started doing in the late 30s, and suddenly it started doing crazy business, and a lot of other theaters around the country started doing it, and then Universal, the people that were then running it, noticed that, and that's when they made Son of Frankenstein, and then the cycle takes off again from there.
Aside from original Frankenstein, do you have a favorite Frankenstein movie?
You mean the beyond the ones that were
Universal
of the cycle, or just in general?
Beyond the first one. We'll go just beyond the first one. Anything. It could be the whole.
You know what? I'm a big fan of the. Did you ever see the 1974 TV movie of Frankenstein?
Yes, we did.
Yeah, I'm a very big fan of that, because that's a very different. That's obviously a very literal telling of it, and I'm a very big fan of that. I have a very vivid memory of being a kid and watching that and really getting absorbed in it. I love that. And then in terms of the, the going back to the cycle, I love Bride. I love Son of Frankenstein. I love Abbott and Costello. Where I'm blanking. Abbott Meet Frankenstein. That classic is beloved by me and like everybody else.
And just to make sure to clear this up, you were referring to the Dan Curtis television one, or
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's one of our favorites now too. So
we actually watched that for the show just a couple weeks ago, and it's so good.
I have such vivid memories of watching it like late at night by myself as a kid, and just going, wow. And it's amazingly good. I need to watch that again for sure.
Yeah.
Maybe I want to have a watch along. I would do it again.
It's definitely worth a rewatch, because I remembered it being something that kind of got overshadowed by like the true story one that came out later, but I think it holds up really, really well.
Oh, it's terrific. I think it's the best. It's the best in terms of an actual adaptation of the story. The Frankenstein that we beloved is obviously incredible, but it doesn't hew very close to the novel.
Right.
True. Yeah. So if you're talking about maybe doing more of these down the road, do you have something that you are currently working on?
I do. I'm actually the reason that I said I started this in 2013. I was kind of concurrently working on another novel and sort of going back and forth, and I finally was like, you got to get this one done. I just love it so much, and I needed to just bear down, and I finished it up. So I'm going back to the other one, which is a novel that, through a series of short stories, tells the story of the space race, the Apollo missions of the '60s. So that's what I'm finishing up right now.
Wow, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, I got a lot of work to do on it, but
Right.
I'm very pleased with it. It's I think it'll be interesting in the same way that this has been received.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot more research and
filling
in the gaps.
You can see behind me, if you could see what I'm seeing over the top of my computer, it's just filled with space research and all kinds of stuff there. Previously, when I was writing, was actually writing this, it was all, pictures and of Lugosi and Karloff and Junior Lemley, and I'm very big on research. That's one of the things I really love, and I really feel I want to just immerse myself in the world when I'm working on it, and that's what I did with that. So now I'm trying to get rid of all this stuff because I got a lot of it.
Right. You got a collection now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I really got that sense that research was really important to you. Reading the book, like the moments that even the moments that it was like, I know this probably didn't really happen. It felt so real, because the research was there, and it all just felt so grounded in reality.
Yeah, I besides loving research, what I particularly love is reading contemporaneous accounts. So I read all of the trade magazines for 1930 and 1931, and the movie magazines, that fans got, because that's how you get a sense of what was going on in the film business. That was kind of the big moment also in my development of the story. I was working on it, like I said, over a long period of time, and it wasn't quite working. And that's when I suddenly had this, it sort of came to me what I was doing wrong. I was concentrating too much on just the monster movies. I needed to understand Hollywood as a bit, what was going on as a whole at the time. And that's, like I said, where like the poker game of the movie heads came out, and all that stuff came from moving beyond the monster movies, because as much as we love them, it was by far not the only thing going on at the time, not even the only thing at Universal. It's obviously lasted a lot longer than almost everything else that was made then, but it was by far obviously not the only thing that was going on, and I needed to delve deeper into that. And I love just accounts of the time written in the time.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's so are there like archives that you're able to track all that down, or
you know what? A lot of it's eBay, just finding the magazines on eBay. And Universal. Okay. One of the best things is Universal itself starting. Lemley builds Universal Studios in 1915. But before that, I think it started in 1912 or 1913. He started this thing called the Universal Weekly, which was used for promoters, theater owners, and for everybody just that they did business with to know what was going on and what films they were making. And that thing was incredibly valuable to sort of track, because it came out every week. But there's one bit that's like so tragic, because the Depression kicked in right before Frankenstein was made. They ceased production of the Universal Weekly literally from 1930 to 1932. So exactly the years when Dracula and Frankenstein were being made, unfortunately, there's no Universal Weekly. So that some stuff was lost there, but leading up to it, you could read. It was just fascinating to read every week, what they were doing, and that's where there's a lot about all the parties they were throwing. And like I said, they found a way to make an anniversary out of just about everything you can imagine, and that's in the Universal Weekly.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think just over the course of the book, there's like 4 parties that maybe take place. Right,
yeah.
Well, if you know Hollywood, that's kind of what it is. You're making movies and going to parties. That's kind of, when I was younger, that's kind of what we did. So
can you fill us in a little bit more on your process of writing these books? Obviously, you get deep into the research, but is there anything else you do, like seclude yourself away from the rest of your family, just like hunker down, turn off the lights?
Yeah, I used to before. I have a 7-year-old son, so it's changed, but I used to write all night. So when I started this, I was writing it at night, and once he was born, that's not possible. I used to be quite nocturnal, but I definitely write away from the family. I have in the back of our house, I sort of have my own space in the there's like a converted garage, for lack of a better term, in the back, and I write in there. And yeah, it's just finding that time to just disappear into your world. It's harder and harder to find. It was definitely a lot easier in my 20s and 30s, I have to admit. But that's just part of life, and I wouldn't trade it. But I miss the night writing, because it was certainly when I would do my best work. I almost used to say to people, it was almost like everybody was asleep. There was less brains at work. I just found I would get in the zone. That's definitely a better time for me. I just don't get as much opportunity to do it anymore. And, it's just, you start with an idea and you go from there. When the journey to this story actually started in a strange way. I watched have you heard this expression? I love it. Children of the glow. Which were kids that grew up building the Aurora model kits with the glow in the dark parts, if you remember those.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was one of those in like the 60s and early 70s. I built the model kits and watched the movies on television in the afternoon. And then I kind of forgot about the movies as, I discovered girls and the other things of life. And then in the late 90s, when there was kind of a renaissance of the movies, I think it was because of Gods and Monsters, I looked at them as an adult, and obviously saw so much more in them. And that's when I started to do the research. And my first thought was, I was thinking, God, isn't that interesting? You've got this character, Frankenstein, and during the Universal years, you have 3 different actors that play him. Lugosi played him, Karloff played him, and then Lon Chaney played him. I said, it'd be interesting, and I guess Glenn Strange too, to do something with that. And then as I delve further into it, when I got to the story of Junior Lemley and what went on before the shooting of the first Frankenstein, that kind of took over, and I developed, that's when it all came together, when I was like, okay, I'm going to tell the story about these 3 characters and the making of the first one. So that was the journey and my process that got me to getting it started.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I feel like there are so many stories in this area that are just ripe, and I mean, you could have picked any little thread and pulled and found something really fascinating. But I mean, this one was especially unique.
That's what it was. It was that, Karloff and Lugosi are so interesting. And then you have Junior Lemley, 21 years old, put in charge of Universal Studios, and he's the one who wants to make these films. I mean, that's not made up. There's a quote by his father from 1932 in the Universal Weekly, where he acknowledges that these films have become huge hits, and he says it was all Junior,
Yeah.
And in fact, this is the other thing that shows you how involved he was in this production, which certainly by today's standards is unheard of, but even then I have to imagine was unusual. There's a recording, I don't know if you guys have ever heard it, from about 1963 of Jack Pierce. He appeared on an episode of like Dialing for Dollars out here in Los Angeles. And have you ever heard of Bob Burns? He's a famous collector of memorabilia. He has that It Came From Bob's Basement book out a few years ago. So by pure luck, he was a fan of these movies back then. He recorded this audio recording of Jack Pierce on Dialing for Dollars, and it's the only thing that exists of this. And in this interview that this host of Dialing for Dollars is having with Jack Pierce, he's asking about Frankenstein, and he literally says in this interview, how did you first get started in this? And he says, Junior Lemley gave me the book. And just the notion that the head of the studio handed the book to him, just shows you how involved he was. And all of that I just found so fascinating as I uncovered it. And Junior is just such a fascinating character. And that's kind of where that sort of took over. And the fact that with Frankenstein, like you said, there's so many stories out of it, all of them come out of the experience of making Frankenstein changed. Karloff goes on to become and stays a huge star for the rest of his life. Lugosi is never as big a star again after turning down than he was at this moment. He had other successes in the 30s, but as we know, the role started getting not as good, and as time passed, he was not in the best of movies, where Karloff just becomes a star and stays a star for the rest of his life. It's kind of remarkable. And Junior has a very interesting 5 or 6 years continuing to run Universal, and then unfortunately after that kind of fades a little bit into obscurity.
Yeah, it's I feel like Lugosi ends up getting a lot more people talk about him more after the fact because his story is so tragic. Whereas, Karloff kind of was just successful and happy, and, he doesn't get as much sort of discussion.
Right. No, the Lugosi story is a little bit more tragic, certainly in the long run.
Yeah, I mean that the Ed Wood thing again, like all the Poverty Row stuff, like that's his.
Yeah, and I do appreciate that you brought up his time in World War One.
Yeah, that's that's a big part of the story, and if you read interviews with him, it obviously had a big effect on him. What he went through there, and I don't think he talked about it a lot, but there are some interviews where he mentions little bits and pieces, and of the experience, and anybody that went through that had to be deeply affected by it, particularly when they end up sort of specializing in darker material. That had to have been a source.
Oh, sure. I feel like that kind of becomes like a through line with horror throughout the years. Like, that Tom Savini was like really influenced by his time in Vietnam. So yeah, it's just you carry that with you and make use of it how you can.
Right.
I think we're probably winding down on our questions, but I do have a bone to pick with you.
Okay.
So I love everything about it. Now, my issue is that during the kind of the lab scene with junior and senior, so you're describing the Jacob's ladder and all the other diodes. You left out the dynamo, I think. Did
I leave out?
That's a that's a big thing for the shows. We love our spinning science wheels.
Yeah, we're really obsessed with those.
Yep.
Well, you know what? Then you're correct. I will. That's certainly one of the greatest scenes ever. I always show that to people, and I had so much fun showing my son. That's what's so great is I can show him Frankenstein. It's so harmless. There's so many things that, like when his friends are over, we can't. We have to be careful what we show, and it's so ironic. This film that just scared people to death. It's like, oh yeah, we can show him Frankenstein. So, I apologize. I'll put it in the
rewrite. The second edition, right?
One of the funny things, and I think you guys will be able to relate to this. You got the box that the publicist sent, and we have the mad scientist goggles. That's not in Frankenstein. It's in Young Frankenstein.
Right, exactly.
And I told them that I couldn't resist. It was my idea because it's so associated with it. And we found some really cool goggles. But it's so ironic because it's not in any of the classic Frankenstein movies, but it's in Young Frankenstein. So
yeah, I really love that touch. I mean, I'm not going to say that sometimes I just wear those walking around the house, but
That's awesome. That's great.
It is kind of, I mean, the original movie is so iconic, but it's also it's shaped so many movies down the road that it's kind of like, I think a lot of people who have maybe not seen the original movie think that Igor is in it, and that that the Fritz character is.
That's Fritz, yeah.
I make the same mistake too because I can't keep it straight because it's the same character but he has a different name, but it's not the same. It's and it's funny, in Son of Frankenstein they put that dialogue in it to explain that they say, oh, he's become so famous that now they call the monster Frankenstein. It's not, he's a monster, but it's so synonymous. And it's the same thing like you said about Igor. It's not Igor, but it's that same type of assistant character and with different names.
Speaking of Igor, what do you think about Igor when he does show up, played by Bela Lugosi?
Oh my God, he's so good. That's probably his greatest performance personally. Really, I love him in so many things, but I honestly, he's so good in that. And it's so amazing that, and that's part of, like you said, if I take the story forward, that he does eventually play Frankenstein. That's what's so, it's really just tailor-made that here he is years later, finally playing the role. So,
yeah.
Yeah. And awesome. Igor was he was made to do Igor. His Frankenstein monster, it's not quite as strong, but and of course I know that he was very hampered by a lot of things in the background with them cutting all the dialogue out and all that.
I know it's and you guys would know this, but I always tell people that the sort of classic thing with the arms outstretched comes from his version of Frankenstein, which is so funny given, and the reason being the character was blind, but you don't know that, so it just looks like he's stumbling around. So even my son is doing that. I'm like, where did you pick that up? I never showed you that one, but it's just everybody says Frankenstein, and they they do that. I mean, it's the Aurora model kit too has the arms outstretched. So in a weird way, he kind of had the last laugh.
He had influence. Yeah.
That even though he didn't play Frankenstein originally so much, or not so much, but a lot of it is what he did with the role.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah, I guess like you said, I think we're about out of questions, but is there anything else that you have that you want to add or anything you want to promote?
No, I mean, thanks for having me on. I hope people will check out the book. You can read the first chapter for free at juliandavidstone.com, and obviously it's available everywhere, Amazon, wherever you want to get it. And I'm really thrilled with how it's gone over. It's been really fun, and I've got some fun events coming up down the line. That people have reached out that are around promoting it. So yeah, I'm very pleased, and thanks for having me on. I love talking about this subject, and congrats on the podcast.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Yeah,
and if we haven't made it clear to everyone listening, like, we love this book. It was incredible. So yeah, we highly recommend that you go out and pick it up.
Thank you.
And we'll definitely be on the lookout for those events and see what's going on there, because we'll be following along to see what you're up to next for sure.
Yeah, you can follow me on the social, my website, social media. I'm very active on Facebook. The website is great for, like I said, if you want to read the first chapter, and I sort of update it with reviews that are coming in, but I don't sort of put my events on there. You can follow the events on Facebook and stuff like that. Just Julian David Stone on Facebook, and I'm always whatever signing or whatever event I have coming up, I'm always talking about it on there. I just happened to be over the weekend in Santa Barbara, so I obviously the very first, I didn't quite put this in the book, and I kind of regret not doing it. I do have a screening in it, but I didn't do it there. But the very first public screening of Frankenstein was in, I think it was October 29th. They had a preview October 29th of 1931 in Santa Barbara, and the theater still stands.
Wow.
The Granada Theater. And I don't know if you guys, this is another story that's another one about Frankenstein, that it's gone through, it's had various versions, but supposedly the legend is that after the screening that night at 3:00 in the morning, the theater manager got a call from somebody who had been at the screening that basically said, "I can't sleep. You shouldn't be able to sleep," and hung up on her.
That's a ringing endorsement to me.
Yeah, no, that's what I mean. It was like the guy was so frightened. It's one of those stories that some attribute it to James Whale got a call. Some say, all these different people. I don't know how many of those people would have gotten that phone number, but I could imagine if you lived in Santa Barbara, you might know the theater manager's number. So that's the one that sort of makes the most sense, but it tells you how it first, went over. So
that's great. That's a really good story.
Yeah, it's a lot of so many great stories around the film.
That's awesome. Yeah, definitely pick it up if you get the chance. Anthony, I believe this is our time to endorse our socials. Where can they find us?
So yeah, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at The Frankencast, and you can email us at thefrankencast@gmail.com. You can find us on Patreon. We just started, patreon.com/The Frankencast. So we'd love to see everyone in all of those places.
Yeah, we even got a little bit of a YouTube, so.
Oh yeah, I always forget YouTube. You always.
I mean, that's fine. That's fine.
But yeah, thank you again. Thank you so much for joining us. It was really great talking to you.
Yeah, no, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on.
Well, in that case, to be continued.
Looks like you survived another episode. The Frankencast is a production of FCR Media. It's hosted by Anthony Bowman and Eric Velasquez. Follow us on Twitter at The Frankencast, or send us a letter at thefrankencast@gmail.com. Our cover art is by Amanda Keller. You can find her at Keller Illustrations on Instagram. Our theme music is by Vivek Abhishek. Thanks for listening.